Bueno, buenas noches, bienvenidos.
Buenas noches, gracias.
Una primera pregunta muy práctica es, ¿todos hablan, entienden inglés? ¿Entienden? ¿Podemos hacer esto en inglés sin problema? ¿Alguien no? Con todo gusto hacemos traducciones, pero si no es necesario nos la ahorramos. Todos hablan inglés, qué maravilla. So we're going to do this in English because everyone understands English. So there's no need for translation.
But I was all ready to go. Buenas noches. Me llamo Marc Mellits. Yo soy Marc Mellits. That's it.
So he's Marc Mellits, and he's our guest. I'm Mauricio Peña. I'm the director of the Luis Ángel Arango Recital Hall, and it's my pleasure to have Marc. I think we have a little bit of a problem with the sound. John, está pitando el parlante mucho. I'm really pleased to have Marc Mellits, our guest composer for this week, Antonio Correa, who's the director of Ensamble Al Seco, and Eduardo Caicedo, who also works with Ensamble Al Seco. Just as a brief introduction, Marc was born in 1966. He started studying music when he was 6. He studied at Eastman School of Music, at Yale School of Music, Cornell University, and at Tanglewood. His music is frequently described as being visceral, and it makes a profound connection with the audience. Very prestigious ensembles have performed his music around the world. His music has been performed at halls such as Carnegie Hall and the Kennedy Center, as well as several festivals, European and American festivals. And it has been performed by ensembles and members from the symphony orchestras of Detroit, Atlanta, Boston, Minneapolis, and the Brooklyn Philharmonic, as well as ensembles as Eighth Blackbird, the Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society, the New Millennium Ensemble, Da Capo Chamber Players, and the American Modern Ensemble. He also has been commissioned to write works for groups such as the Kronos Quartet, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, the Assad Duo, Bang & Can All Stars, Elliott Fisk, Canadian Brass, as well as many others from both the United States and Europe. He conducts and performs with his own ensemble, the Mellits Consort, and in 2004 he received the award from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. His music can be heard in different recordings from labels such as Black Box, Endeavor Classics, Cantaloupe, CRI Emergence Music, Santa Fe New Music, Innova, and Dacia Music. He teaches at the University of Illinois Chicago, where he teaches composition and music theory. So Marc, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a really great pleasure to have you here. I'm going to start with a question for Antonio, because this project came by because of Antonio's invitation. He actually invited us, Banco de la República and the Luis Ángel Arango Library to be in this project. So Antonio, why did you want to work with Marc? Where did this idea come from?
It was kind of an accident, really. It was just kind of things that... oh yeah, hello. As I was saying, it was kind of a series of accidents that actually got us here. In fact, it takes me back to how I got to know Marc's music, which was by mistake. I was looking up for a video on YouTube of a piece by Steve Reich that is called Music for Mallet Instruments, Voices on Organ, and I misspelled mallets. And then, I just wrote
Music
that.
For Mellits.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and I was just, then Tight Sweater appeared. That was the first video. I was Tight Sweater, what? Okay. So I just clicked on it, and it was magic, you know.
Serendipity.
Very, very, very exciting. And it was music I could relate to, but more importantly, I could actually play. And music that can be played here. I'm talking about practical things, you know. The instrumentation is practical. You can actually do it. So we just went for it. I bought some scores, talked to the guys, and around that time we were working on our website, So I told him that maybe you should listen who's going to be playing your pieces, you know. Be good idea, you know. We can do something with the pieces. And he wrote back and he was very kind and he said, yeah, well, you sound great, I like your repertoire and we should do something together. So I said, well, if you're serious, I'll get on it. And he said, well, yeah, I'm serious. So here we are. That's basically it.
We, little back history. We worked with Antonio a couple years ago because he performed with Jeroen Van Ven, Simon Tenholt's Canto Ostinato. And, it's a nice project when you can work with somebody and projects happen and they come to occur, actually. You know when an idea like this comes along, it will happen. So it's a testimony of, the good work of Antonio and his ensemble that this project came to happen. So Mark, had you heard of Colombia and music movement in Colombia and Antonio and anything like that before he contacted you at all?
I didn't know. I knew of Colombia. I knew of this fascination with soccer, sort of an international reputation, going a little nuts over it. But I know the background of Colombia, like most Americans know, which is pretty minimal. And as far as Antonio, I didn't know until I don't think so, although I may have seen his name, I think. But I didn't really know what he did until he contacted me. And then I did look at what he was doing, and the repertoire is really, it's my kind of repertoire. So, I jumped at the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to go back in time a little bit and talk about your development as a composer. And you were 6 when you started studying music. How did you evolve into actually becoming a composer? Usually, when one studies music, you start playing piano, playing an instrument.
Right.
But to actually turn into a creative person, you create music out of a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, I think that's kind of normally how it goes. At some point, you start being a composer, or people choose to be a composer at some point. But it didn't happen that way for me. It was actually completely the opposite. It was totally backwards. I started as a composer. I started writing music first. And what I would do is, even before I was 6, maybe around 4, my neighbors across the street from me had a piano, the only one in the neighborhood with a piano. And I found myself playing their piano all the time. I would just kind of beat on it and play things. I was only 4, so what can you do? And what I would love to do is, from the room where the piano is, you could see in the next room the television. So I'd go over to their house. I was in their house all the time. They were like second parents to me, because they had a piano. And no, they were wonderful people. And I would turn on the television, but turn the volume off, so it was just the scenes. And then I'd run over to the piano and I would just make up scores for the visuals of what I was seeing. And then it turned into melodies, and I would just kind of write melodies. And then by the time I was 6, I had been begging my parents for piano lessons, because I wanted to learn how to read music, and I wanted to learn how to write down all these little songs, as I called them, that I was writing. So after about a year of begging, around the time I was 6, they gave in and they decided to give me piano lessons, and then that was it. Once the reason I took piano lessons, even at that young age, was really just to learn, not to play the piano, was to learn how to write down what I was already composing. So when you say, when did I decide to be a composer, when did I choose composition, it never happened. I think it's not an occupation that works that way. Being a composer chooses you. Being composition basically will choose you. If you're doing it at that young age, you already are doing it. It's not something, you can't wake up one day as a musician and say, well, you know what, I think I'll be a composer. So it doesn't really work that way. There are musicians who at a very young age will start to write music, and that's kind of how it happens usually. I think with me it just happened younger. But when you don't usually start when you're in your 20s. You're going to start much, much younger than that. And it just kind of, it's kind of what you're doing. Anyway, I thought at that age, every musician wrote music. I had no idea that you could just be a composer. This was insane. I thought everybody wrote music, as I did. And then one day my piano teacher told me, he's like, you know, Mark, if you wanted to take composition lessons, you could. I'm like, what? Like, you can take lessons in learning how to do this? He's like, yeah, because people specifically do that. I was always bringing my music to him. And I said, well, what do your other students do with their music? And he's like, I don't have any other students who write music. I'm like, this was kind of shocking to me. So that's when I decided to take composition lessons.
What age was that?
I didn't take my first composition lesson until I was a senior in high school.
Oh.
I was just all completely self-taught until that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then I graduated from the Peabody Prep, which is an undergrad, a pre-college university, after 1 year of study. It was the first person to do that in that school, because I was just writing so much, music at the time. I think that I didn't understand what it would be like to study music with a composition teacher. I just thought, I guess I was too arrogant that, I already know what I'm doing. Let me just write my next symphony. I mean, when you're that young, you can't stop writing music. I wrote like a symphony a day. It's amazing because you have nothing stopping you. You don't recognize how terrible it is. So you just write. So you just keep writing, and that, I'm telling you, man, that's the best way to learn is just to keep writing. I had a very smart teacher at Eastman when I was very young. He told me and a few other people, he said, boys, you don't understand. What I want from you is quantity, not quality. And, English wasn't his first language, so we were like, well, yeah, you mean you have that wrong, right? No, quantity. Don't worry how good it is. You're 20 years old. You're going to throw this music away. You're going to learn how to write by just writing. So just keep writing. Write as fast as you can. Write, and you'll figure it out on the way. Best advice I ever got.
How many teachers do you have at Eastman?
4. I had a different teacher every year. That's how they do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
I studied with some really great people there.
What would you say you got out of each of them? Can you just briefly describe what each teacher...
Yeah. Each teacher had something very different from me. My first teacher was a man named Warren Benson, who opened up the doors for me to see music in a whole other way. When I was stuck with music and I didn't really know where it would go, he would say, look, Mark, just take the music, turn it upside down, change the clef, and there you go. You have material for more. Which basically is teaching you, if you're stuck for ideas, don't look for new ideas. Go back to the ideas you already have and screw with them. Just kind of play with them. Because music is really just a game anyway. It's a game with pitches and rhythms, and that's what I sort of got from him. As a child, you know what Legos are? These little plastic bricks?
Yep.
Right. So as a child, I played with Legos all the time. I was always building stuff with Legos. And I think I'm still playing with Legos, only it's blocks of sound. And that's how I think about music, is just sort of playing games with things. And he taught me, when you're building these pieces, to look back at the Legos you've already been building and build something out of that. So I learned how to write cohesive music. Samuel Adler was probably one of the best teachers I've ever had, who taught me everything about form, to really look at your music and see form that's already there. Don't write form and then put the music into it. Look at the form that your music is already doing and then finish it off. Those were two of the big things I learned there.
Do the very interesting titles to your music come from back then?
What do you mean? What's wrong with my title?
They're not wrong. They're fantastic.
Tight Sweater is what does Tight Sweater tell you? Okay, Sonata number 7. How is that any different from Tight Sweater? My titles are weird because I'm weird. There's weird and there's good weird. So, I live in a very stiff, boring world. As many of you may know, the classical music world is full of regulations and full of rules, and it keeps people away. If you go to a symphony concert, for example, people don't even know what to wear. If you're not used to going, you don't know what to wear. You don't know when to clap. You don't know and it's a daunting, it's terrifying for some people, and you can't talk. You have to be super quiet. I hate this. Music should be open and free, and you should just go and experience it. It's art. Art is the greatest thing for humanity. Why should it just be for some people? So by titling things weird titles, what happens is people open up their program books and they're looking, Symphony number 3 of Beethoven, whatever, and Tight Sweater, and they start laughing, and it just kind of like loosens things up a little bit, and I think it helps people approach it because they immediately think, I don't have to really figure this piece out because he's calling it Tight Sweater. Maybe it's going to be kind of a joke. Maybe this guy isn't serious. But then when the music comes, they realize, wow, there really is something there. And it was easy to get to because they broke down, they weren't even trying anymore, and it just breaks them down and lets the music come to them. I really want music to come to people and not people have to think that they have to go to the music. It's like, oh, it's a new piece of music. I have to learn, I have to study to try and figure out what it is. No, the music has to study humanity to figure out how to come to us.
Mm-hmm. How's that relationship with the audience? You know, as a live composer, you just mentioned the experience of going to a symphony, and you go to a symphony and you hear a bunch of music from a bunch of dead people.
Yeah, dead white guys.
But in your case, you can talk to people. People can ask you questions. How does that affect your music? Does that affect the impression of people have of your music?
Oh, probably not the former, but definitely the latter. So I don't think it affects how I write, because I write what I want. I write what I write. I don't try to write to an audience, because I tried that a couple of times and I failed every time. If I try to write what I think an audience wants to hear, it's not going to work. You have to write what you really believe in your heart and hope that people like it. If no one likes it in the world, okay, then maybe you should think of another occupation. But there's some guy down in Colombia named Antonio who really likes it, and some guy in New York named Kevin Gallagher who really likes it, then I'm okay. I got enough people. And then it builds and builds and builds, enough, and people play it, and then all that happens is other people hear it, and then they play it, and it really spawns upon itself. At this point, this season, I had over 500 performances of my music in one calendar year. That's a lot for someone my age, and I think it all just kind of spawns itself, you know? Antonio plays something, somebody hears it, then they want to play it, and somebody hears that, and they want to play it, and that's how it works.
Antonio just mentioned that, you know, it was by accident that he found you on YouTube. Has the internet, has that changed the way your music gets known around the world?
But in weird ways.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly has. I have videos that are in the multi-millions that do very little as far as getting me out there. I have other videos that are in, say, 100,000 range, or even under 100,000, 50,000 range, that have done amazing things for me. So it really depends on the piece and what it is. I have one small piece called Black. It's 5 minutes. Somebody's shaking their head. So this piece, bass clarinet duo, somebody put it on YouTube, and people started to see it in a small little world of the bass clarinet world, which then became the Barry sax world because they wanted it, and then it became the bassoon world because they wanted it. Because they saw it on YouTube, everybody wanted to play it. To this day, it's my most played piece. It's been played over 1,000 times since I wrote it just a few years ago. 1,000 performances of one piece, and it's a bass clarinet or Barry sax duo. It's purely only because of the internet. Only because of YouTube had that piece out there.
It helps that there aren't many bass clarinet concertos, I guess.
That's right. But it doesn't help with royalties. Google owns YouTube, and they're, I will say on the record, the absolute worst about paying royalties. It's terrible. It's a big problem that we have.
Have you, in your career, have you felt that change from a world where everything was pretty much controlled in terms of royalties?
Yeah.
And now it's pretty much a free game?
So royalties on CDs, since people started, in the old days, and people started burning CDs, so royalties on CDs for me now are 10% of what they used to be, because of people just stealing music. And royalties on internet stuff, for when it started, at where it is now, is also diminished. They keep paying less, except for iTunes, for some reason, pays the same rate and always has, which is great. Yay, Apple.
Going back to your studies, and I think this is a question that maybe some of the guys attending here are worried about, is, you know, choosing a music school. How did you go about that? You know, because let's talk about your transition from Eastman into Yale,
right.
Into Cornell. I mean, where you got your master's. How did you decide to attend Cornell after having attended Eastman and having such a solid music education?
It's really easy. So first of all, it's the other way around. So it was Eastman was undergrad, but Yale was my master's, and Cornell was my doctorate. Okay. So I can work backwards, maybe. I went to Cornell because my mentor at Yale told me to go there. I mean, he said, this is where you need to go. And that was the only reason I went there. I mean, Eastman it's a typical conservatory, where it's a lot of, it's just a conservatory training. It's a really intense Incredible place, amazing, amazing place. But it's a very conservatory setting. Yale is also a conservatory setting. And after all that school, I went to Yale, for example, to work with this guy named Martin Bresnik. Martin Bresnik is a hero to my generation, the generation before me, and the generation after me. Martin Bresnik is the guy. His music is incredible. He's an incredible teacher, an incredible man. We're still very good friends. So I went there to work with him because every composer that I liked that was still alive studied with him. It was that simple. Like every single one of them. David Lang, Michael Gordon, Julia Wolf, they all studied with him. Evan Ziporyn, all studied with him. So I wanted to study with him because everyone else did, and I saw the magic. He's magic. So then, after all that time of school in very typical conservatory setting, he told me, Mark, you really need to just write music now. You need to just go someplace where you don't have to actually take a lot of classes and do a little teaching maybe just to get your, you can teach to get an assistantship for money to go. But other than that, you can just write music. So Cornell is in this beautiful place, Ithaca, New York. You can go up there and just write music for as long as you can to hone your craft. That's what he thought I needed at that point, to just hone and try and perfect it as best I could. Mm-hmm. So that's the specific reason I went there.
It's been interesting to look at your bio and realize that it's a very it's a fully American education.
It is.
Whereas our tradition here in Colombia is very, I would say, more on the European side of the way conservatories are shaped, curricula is shaped. Did it ever occur to you to go to Europe?
Yeah. And so after Eastman, and Eastman is of all those schools, Eastman is going to be the most European model. Yale is certainly not, and Cornell is not. But Eastman, because it's such an international school, it's like 40%, outside the U.S. So they sort of tailor it that way. My master's, I thought of going to England. So I went to visit Guildhall and the Royal Conservatory and met with Ali Newson there. And Newson told me to not go. He just said, if you're coming from places like Eastman and you want to go to a place like Yale, you're not going to find it here. You should have already come here. Mm-hmm. Now is not the time. Like an undergrad degree is where he thought it would have been better for me to come. But he's like, you've done that with Eastman. He's like, don't come for graduate school. He suggested I stay in the U.S. for graduate school. So I did.
So basically his concept was, this is more conservative than what you're going to find.
He said, look, it comes, and I didn't really get this from him. I got it from learning. The first I went to Europe, my brain exploded. I had been in the United States my whole life. The United States is very, very far away. It's very isolated from the rest of the world. And it doesn't have a deep history. We were talking about this today. And it doesn't have a deep history, therefore it doesn't have a deep culture. Culture comes from history. It's a very new and young country, so we don't have a lot of history, we don't have a lot of culture. And the arts, what we do, lives in culture. So the first time I left the U.S. and went to Europe and saw how deep, arts were in culture, it blew my mind. And I've been spending time in Europe a lot ever since. The difference is, by staying in the U.S. and studying there, let me backtrack a little bit. I love Europe, but one of the problems is with that history and with that culture comes some sort of cultural baggage that's very hard to break away from. It's very, very, very hard for composers in Europe to sort of break away from the tradition and they know where they are. If you go to France, I have many composer friends in France. They know exactly where they are in sort of a historical point. In the U.S., we don't have the history, we don't have the culture, therefore we don't have that baggage. You can do whatever you want, and it's okay. No one's going to say you can't write that. It's incredible. You're encouraged to think outside of the box, because there really is no box to begin with. So that's why I think doing graduate studies in the U.S. was really, really great. Did I get off the track? Maybe. Okay. Yeah. But that's a big difference. But I still spend tons of time in Europe. I work a lot in Europe. I have a lot of concerts in Europe, so I find it really inspiring, to be in Europe.
You just talked about mentors.
Yeah.
How does a mentor, or are there stages in a musician's or a composer's life for one mentor and to leave maybe that mentor and move on to
Okay.
find different people?
So that analogy of baggage, there's another one. And with every mentor you have and every person you study with, you're going to pack a little suitcase. I've got my Martin Bresnik suitcase, and I take it with me wherever I go. I have my Steve Reich suitcase. It's a pretty big one, and it's heavy. It really weighs me down. I got a Philip Glass fanny pack, you know, and I got a Vivaldi one too, which is as big as a house, you know. And I think as you grow as a composer, you have to start leaving these bags down, start taking stuff out of it. But I really have this thing of you carry all this stuff around you because this is where you learn, and it's scary to sort of put it away. But eventually you do, and then hopefully you'll be in a good place when you do it because you know, you definitely pick up stuff, imitate stuff that you have to let go at some point, one at a time, just one at a time.
You just mentioned Steve Reich, and then I just read something that I found very interesting, is that the fact that the Boozy and Hawkes edition of music for 18 musicians, you edited the final edition.
I didn't edit it, I created it.
Yeah, exactly. From all the parts that
Yeah.
Steve had worked
Yeah.
with. How was the process? Because from what I understand, and maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong, he had parts depending on who played which part, and if the musician changed and he didn't have the chops to address a part, he would edit and change. And
He actually didn't have any parts. So here's how it happened. So he started writing the piece. He wrote the piece between 1974 and 1976. And how he would write it was this. He would write little chicken scratch notes for people, his friends. And he would buy them all bus tickets to come into New York. He would rent a loft space and rent a bunch of marimbas and things and put them all in his loft space. And say, okay, you play this little thing until you hear Antonio play that. And this is what it is. And when he does that, then Eduardo, you switch to this and you start playing this. And that's how they were doing it. It was all sort of like that. So nothing was written down in score. But they did this for 2 years. 2 years they created this piece. After 2 years of doing it, they all had it completely memorized. They had little cheat sheets of like ideas, but it was completely person specific. It wasn't really a part. Half of it wasn't even there. And he played that piece with those musicians only, because they're the only ones who knew it. It was completely committed to memory. So it was only in their heads, and only by those 18 people that could play it. They recorded it. That first record sold 100,000 copies in the first year, which hadn't been done in contemporary classical music, like, ever. So he was a huge hit, a success, and he took that piece on tour for 10 years. They played it all over the world for 10 years until they were done with it, and then he started, other pieces, Sextet he wrote after that, and a bunch of other works. They put 18 away, and then people were calling Boozy and Hawkes to play it, like, we want to play this piece, can we get the music? And they're like, it's a very embarrassing answer, but there is no music. He never wrote this. He tried multiple times, couldn't do it. Boozy hired 3 copyists, professional copyists, to write it out. They couldn't do it. So then I get this phone call when I was in graduate school. The phone call, I was at Yale. I was finishing Yale, so it would have been 91. And they said, we've seen you do some copying for some of your teachers. There's a man named Jacob Druckmann that I had done some copying for. And they said, and Martin Bresnik. They said, it looks really beautiful. Would you consider working for this guy, Steve Reich? Have you heard of him? Like, yeah, I've heard of him. It's like, do you know this piece, 18 Musicians? It's like, oh, yeah, I know it pretty well. He's like, well, we think we want to get a copyist who's actually a composer this time because it kind of needs to be recomposed. You need to sort of think like a composer to do it. I'm like, I'm your guy. He's like, okay, wait, there's no score. I'm like, what? He's like, there's no score. I'm like, okay. But you're going to have to work very closely with Reich. And this is why he did it. They said, he's going to call you. Reich calls me, and I'm like shaking. We've become really, really good friends now. In fact, I just talked to him before he came down there. Adensky's been wonderful to me and very generous to me. But at that time, I'd never met him before, and he was a hero. And he told me this. He goes, Mark, this is my phone number. Don't give it out to anyone. But this is the number. If you call me, I don't answer the phone until I know it is. Say your name, and I will pick it up, whatever I'm doing, right away. That's how important this piece is to me. I'm like, damn, I can call Steve Reich whenever I want. I'm like, this is awesome. So that's how we started. And then he said, okay, look, we need to do some other pieces first. We did Sextet. They wanted to sort of see if it would work, our relationship. It did. And then finally we did 18. I listened to it very, very closely. And what they wanted me to do was write it all out from beginning to end. Just take dictation and write it all out. That's what I did. 400 and some pages of score. It's huge. I looked at it, and I hated it. It was completely stupid. It didn't work. I called Reich, and I said, okay, I did what you guys told me to do. He goes, okay, send it. I sent it up to him. You look at it, he goes, yeah, man, that's great. It's great. I said, but Steve, look, it's just a dictation of that particular recording that you made that particular day. After getting into this piece, I'm realizing how flexible it is. Like, people were doing things because other things happened, right? He's like, yeah. It's like, why don't we create a score that does that? He's like, you can't. It's not going to work. I said, I have an idea. We'll have floating bars, like a cutout score. And as soon as I said that, he just, no, it's going to be Earl Brown. Because it's going to look like Earl Brown. It's like, no, it's going to be, the 60s are over. I was like, no. I said, no, man, the 60s are not over. It's 1996. The 60s are not over. Like, okay. I said, look, promise me one thing. Promise you hear me out. Let me show you what I've got, and we'll go from there. He said he agreed. I drove to his house in Vermont, and I spent 2 or 3 days with him, staying there with him, and showed him all the different types of all the sections and how they would look floating. And after 2 or 3 days, he was like, okay, this is it. We can do it. He said, but now we have to convince Boozy to rehire me again to do it all over again. And they just see dollar signs. They were like, no problem. So then we did it all over again, and I took that score, cut it in half, so it was about 200 pages, and was able to create a sort of floating bar system. I had to create like a whole new notation system, create sort of different type of repeat signs, so that everything would work, and all the parts themselves like mini road maps. Like, you have your part, and you always have someone else's part. You're like, okay, listen to this, and when he does that, do that. Then count 18 bass clarinet chords, and then he's going to stand up and cue everyone you get to there. I just played the piece last week, Saturday night, right before I flew here. We used those road maps. It was like a breeze. You know, it's the most joyous thing to play. It was a labor of love. It was one of the most exciting, fun things I've ever done with my life. It was my job for 2 years. It was postgraduate school. This is what I did. And I'm very proud of it and really happy with the way it came out. I'm happy they let me do it the way I wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. And now, taking advantage of this topic that we've touched on, which is the way music may be written, but the way it is performed, it might be different. Yeah. And Eduardo, maybe you can tell us a little bit about getting Marc's music and not knowing him, not having talked to him, just doing something with it. How is that difficult, or did you listen to recordings? Was what was written clear, or was something missing? And did something change today when you finally worked with Marc?
All right. After that accident that Antonio already told, good accident, excellent accident. We bought the Disciples.
That
was so good. It was the first one we played, and already.
Which came back to me. That was the package.
That was Parma Cheese. That's Parma Cheese. That was after that one. So when we begin to play that piece, when we begin to rehearse that piece, I found it a lot of rock and roll inside, And I already told him that this morning, that I was like, wow, this thing is very close to me. I begin my education like self-taught drummer with heavy metal and rock and roll, and I don't know. And I discovered I already told Antonio once, I heard some licks from Metallica and things like that on his music, Seek and Destroy and things like that, and was like, wow, this is incredible. And it was very good music because it's a very good mix of a lot of stuff I like, That piece has improvised percussion part, which of course I cannot play it because I'm playing the marimba, but that's another kind of thing that I like a lot, like that kind of traditional percussion instruments from the world that you can add to that music. So, I feel very related to that, and every piece we are making it's a wonderful piece, has a lot of personality, every one of them, and I don't know, I enjoy it a lot. I told him that this morning. I was like, this is incredible time to play this music, to work with him, of course, here. It's like, I think you don't have for every music you play. And knowing his music from that time, and after I went on 2010 to Bangna Ken, and I have little contact with a lot of people, with Bresnik and all these people, Julia and David Lang and all these people. It was wonderful to see how his name wasn't there, you know. And well, this guy is famous, you know. and it's a very good music, and it was okay. We continue with that, and then Antonio, we talk about to this project of to tell you about he coming here and all that, and it was like, let's go for it. And he's the one that is in charge of that kind of stuff. I'm in charge of another stuff in the group. So, and that's a good thing because
that's very good.
yeah, we just separate like kind of work we have inside the group. And yeah, it was like the great thing, and having him here and going to Medellin and doing all this stuff and then this is work. I mean, I'm tired now. I'm here from 9, playing all day marimba, but it's a wonderful time to play with him.
I would add something to that because I'm very excited. I'm very tired too, but I'm actually very excited. So for me, it was I was kind of a loser when I was growing up. You know, I was the loser kid from a small town that actually plays the piano. You know, that doesn't really look good in a small town.
At the neighbor's house as well? Or?
No. I was, that would have been tricky actually. You know, the neighbors wouldn't have been as nice as your neighbors probably. So I always wanted to play rock and roll. You know, but I was the loser kid that plays plays Haydn and Mozart and that kind of stuff. And so I would go to band auditions and stuff like that. Can I play the keyboards, man? You know. And what can you play? Well, I have this Haydn sonata. Okay, you can just pick it up. Yeah. Maybe you can. Yeah, no. It's 4/4. No, okay. So I never got to experience that growing up. And in my house, you didn't really listen to rock. You pretty much listened to Bach a lot and jazz, which I wasn't a big fan of. And so there was this part of me for a very long time that didn't know what to do with that musical interest until Marc's music arrived. I'm not saying his music is rock and roll. I don't think it is.
No, it's not.
It's not at all. It is a blend of many things. One of which happens to be rock and roll. I think it's very down to earth music, very keen to the way the world works now. You know, and you have to have influences from everyone and everything, and you have to let things come to you, because what are you gonna do? Shut Metallica out? You know, or you can't do that actually. You know, so it's very interesting for me to find these things that I wanted to do as a kid, and actually be able to do them because I played Haydn. That's kind of the point, you know. Because I don't think I could play the pieces if it weren't for my classical education, of course. But it's really exciting for me on a very personal level because of that. So yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask also both either Antonio or Eduardo. I think this is just my impression that music teaching in Colombia has been very Euro-centered, and our composition teachers have also come from a European tradition, you know, with boulez, Stockhauses, stuff like that.
Sorry.
We'll get back to that comment. But
I actually love the lessons.
but I think, you know, exploring composers like David Lang or Marc's music, it's a relatively new thing in music schools here.
Yep.
You know, how did you come about discovering that music, and how has this changed or opened anything new for you guys? You both mentioned, the desire to be rock stars or to do that, which probably Boulez, Stockhausen did not allow for.
Yeah.
To have
hiding
that,
for them.
or hiding for that. But
Haydn's
perhaps,
a rock star.
Yeah.
And let me just backtrack. Haydn's piano sonatas are awesome.
Yes, they are. Thank
And
you.
they
Listen,
And they fit under the hands.
I was the only person in my semester
They're
that
genius.
actually like hiding.
Haydn's
People
piano-
can testify here.
They're
He can
incredible.
testify that.
They're genius because they fit under the hands so incredibly well. I mean, they're just right there. I love Haydn.
I love hiding too. I love it too.
Same thing.
yeah. So this music is relatively new to I guess, the music context here in Colombia. How has this changed anything for you guys? Like, opened new roads, or has that created any controversy with your peers, or?
Yes.
Yeah, that a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit. I think
Yeah, very,
much than a little bit. From my point of view, when you have a percussion instruction education here, the only thing you know about States music is Steve Reich. You know music for pieces of wood, and you know clapping music, and that's all. Really, and maybe you know glass because of Koyaanisqatsi, and that's all, because you saw the movie and things like that. So, of course, I play both pieces, music for pieces of wood. We played it together in an ensemble we had a long time ago, and clapping music, of course, I made it. But I think in that group that we were making at that time, we were 2 guitarists, 2 pianists, and me.
Yeah.
And we all play all the different instruments. I play piano, for
played
example, he plays
marimba,
percussion.
marimba.
We just changed everything up.
Earl Brown.
We began to do Earl Brown's music, and thanks to that teacher, it was Sergio Restrepo.
Yeah.
We like that opens our mind to that, and our ears and our eyes to that kind of music, and to get deep into that because we like it a lot, and we know that our teachers are not going to teach that to us. So we begin to discover. That's why we're still playing now, because at that time we were like having that kind of similarity on taste in the music we were trying to do, and I love European music also a lot, but you can feel here that there's not too much of that other music, because all the stuff about the States and all that you can hear from South America and all that, and political stuff and all that stuff. So that culture thing that the States can have, that is very good, you don't see it because the States are the bad ones. That's all, really. And that's the point that we say that maybe some people can argue with that, with us about that, because
They don't seem to appreciate that we
Really?
play American music, not because it is American music, but because we just like it. We happen to like it.
that's all.
That's all there is to it.
And we learned a lot about doing that music alone, because we don't have any. We did a glass record and all that, and we didn't have like all the training for that. We just learned it on the way.
But there's no training.
Yeah, I mean it's the same.
So
As he did,
yeah.
obviously.
If the U.S. mentioned 2 people, Steve Reich and Philip Glass. It's not like they're heroes in academia in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
It's not the same.
they're more like demons. So when I was in school in the 1980s, say at Eastman, Steve Reich was an outcast, and Philip Glass was a nothing.
Yeah.
Why? Because they were popular, and academia wanted nothing to do with
And
them.
it's the same with that here.
Right, and it was a slow change, and it's been, maybe today Steve Reich is finally legitimized in the U.S. He's pushing 80. It's taken a long time for academia in his own country to appreciate him. Steve Reich was a figure outside of academia. And so I just wanted to clarify, if you think that in the United States we come from a school where we study this kind of music and learn how to play it, we had to figure out how to play it too on our own. It was the same thing, because Reich and Glass were outcasts. They were the devil. That's why they were cool.
Yeah.
But-
Rock and roll. How it goes.
How is that experience in Europe? I mean, your music has been performed in Europe. You visit Romania
Yeah.
often, and also Orpheus Chamber Orchestra.
They toured it.
They toured one of your pieces through
Yeah.
several countries in Europe. How is that sense? You know, with this going abroad actually give validity to a piece, to a composer? Does that happen?
Oh yeah, you know, Europe is, it's kind of the same reaction wherever I go. They always tell me the same thing, that it's refreshing. That, you know, when they hear my music in Europe, because there is such traditional European music it's played, and it's incredible stuff. There's some amazing music being written there, but it's being written in a style that they're very comfortable with and they can understand.
The baggage.
So it's, yeah, the baggage. They got some serious baggage. So, you know, when my music is played there, they always tell me the same thing. It's so refreshing and different. The first time the Bang on a Can played my piece, Five Machines, in Paris at my brain is dead. Yeah, across the street from Pump, you know, exactly.
La Cité, no?
Yeah. This is Boulez's stand, you know, he built this bunker. It is a bunker. It's underground, you know. And there's a lot of crazy stuff that's played down there. Really high-end, virtuosic, academic stuff, some beautiful stuff. And then Bang on the Can played my piece there, and people told me, and Bang on the Can told me, they were so afraid, because they came out on stage, like, we're going to play Mellits, and they're going to go nuts because it's Paris. They're going to boo, you know. But they went crazy. And I had all these calls coming in from Paris. Commissions started literally coming in because of that one single concert. They never heard anything like it before. Man, you're using electric guitar. How cool is that? So I had that experience. From that point forward, I had that experience all over Europe where people found it really refreshing and honest. And I'm just trying to do my thing, trying to create this little ball of art. I don't care about anything else. I don't think about politics. I don't think about what they're writing, who's writing. I just think about what I'm writing. I want to make this little ball of art and throw it out into the audience and have them play around with it and throw it back to the performers. And it's just a game. It's art. It's just trying to make the world better. That's it. Mm-hmm. So if people like it, all the better. I've been going to Europe since multiple times per year since that concert.
Now, you just mentioned politics, and I'm assuming you mentioned politics as the politics of music.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also lived through, you know, very momentous times through the 70s and 80s and, you know, September 11 and all that. Does this feed back into your music at all, or is it a separate world?
It absolutely doesn't. I wanted to, and it doesn't. I tried to write pieces that are somehow, you know, because if something happens, September 11th was a different thing. I mean, I literally, I did not want to write a September 11th piece because I did not want to give it any more validity than it deserves. I was asked to, and I refused. But other things would happen in the 70s and whatever, in the 80s, and I just, look, if you try, it's not honest. I've tried lots of things that don't work. I go to Romania every summer, as you mentioned. We have a house there. My wife was born there. I'm crazy about Romania. Man, it's like here. Colombia's kind of a paradise. We were talking about. I think I discovered heaven. I keep thinking I died, and like this is heaven. These musicians are so incredible. But you go to Romania, and it's just this natural place where food is right out of the ground, and the people are so wonderful. And so I go there a lot and write a lot of music there. And I love folk music of Romania, and also the gypsy music of Romania. I'm really fascinated with. And I've tried to put this sort of this gypsy music into my music. It sounds like complete crap. I mean, it's not me. It's not on. It's like, oh, there it is. I'm going to put it in. It doesn't work. Or if something momentous happens politically or whatever, and you try to do that, if I try to do that in my music, it's just not honest. It's not me. I don't think that large scale. I think pretty small. I just want to be a good boy, write good music. That's it. I don't really think beyond that. So it's not honest, so I stopped doing it.
Mm-hmm. talk about scale. It's a very different thing to have your own group. You have your consort, just like Steve probably had
He
his
told me to
band.
start it. That was his idea. It wasn't mine.
Field Glass as well has its own. Does that change the way you look at composition? I don't know if you have that many. Do you have orchestral works? I couldn't find any
of
yet.
course, yeah. Orpheus, of course.
Okay, of course, yeah.
Others. It really did. So, working with your own group, even the little that we do it now, going through that experience was amazing. Simply performing your own music, every composer needs to do this. You have to do this. Even if it's for a small audience, your friends, you have to go through what it's like to learn how to practice rhythm and who to cue what and learn how to play it. Because if you're writing for people and if you're not experiencing that, what the heck are you doing? How do you even know what you're doing? And the same thing with performers. Performers need to write music. You can do it. Doesn't have to be good, but you have to try, write a piece, have your friends play it, and see how it sounds. Just so you know what it's like for composers to have to sit there in that dark room for 6 months writing that thing. So it was a tremendous experience for me, but it's been my whole life. When I was a kid, I did it. When I was a kid, I had a jazz group. I wrote for every week. I would write music for my jazz quintet every week, and Saturday afternoon, all my buddies would come over. This is what nerds we were. We would play through all the music I wrote that week, and I got immediate feedback, and I was playing it myself, and it really helped shape me. I think I try to write music that is very practical. It may be hard, and there's some people in this room who will tell you it's hard.
It's a good one. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
A lot.
it's hard. This guy's a freak. He doesn't miss a note. It's weird. He can't be human. He's like some kind of android.
Some people say that I'm not human.
Yeah.
Out there.
You'll hear, his playing is just ridiculously good. So, writing for my own group kind of shaped what I was doing, and I've always said, and I try to be very practical about it, and I think about paying, and I think about page turns, and I think about going from pizzicato to arco, and I think about all these things that I learned just playing it and being with other people to play it. You can't go from this to this from that note, so I don't do it. I try to write music that's very, very practical. Whether I'm successful at it or not, I don't know. They can tell you, but I do try.
Several groups have commissioned pieces from you. Is there anything that you wish you knew before you got your first commission about working for other performers that you were not taught when you were in school?
Yeah, you learn all that stuff on the way. There's definitely things. I have a contract. I got burned once, and so.
Why do you think music schools do not address those practical issues? Head on.
It's not a good answer. Do you really want to know the truth?
Yes.
They're in denial. Music schools are producing more and more students every year for a field that in the United States is dwindling. That's the truth. Orchestras are dying in the U.S. They're not doing well. Orchestras are going under, and this is the main thing where people go through out of music school, is they go into orchestral jobs. So orchestras and that whole tradition of orchestral playing is scary because it's not viable anymore. And I think music schools have this mentality of sort of really in denial. So they're not preparing people for that whole thing, and they really should. So this idea of not having to prepare a composer for that kind of stuff because, we don't have to because it's going to happen, you're going to have this great life. Bullshit. You need to prepare them for this because it's not going to happen. If you do, you can help them. Oddly enough, as orchestras are dying, chamber music is flourishing. Chamber music is doing extremely well in the U.S. And that's the sort of, I don't know about here, but there it's doing really well. And music schools are very slow to this shift, but they're shifting. But they've been very, very slow. They're really kind of in denial. They have this orchestral mentality. They have this mentality that composers are going to be, composer in residence with an orchestra. It's not going to happen anymore. So they don't teach you the skills that you need to know if you don't have a publisher, if you're on your own. But they should, and they will eventually. But it's a very slow process.
Does composing for a certain group of people limit or change the way you approach music, or that dialogue or conversation with a performer change things? I can't do this. either aesthetically or technically, do you change pieces
Absolutely.
with the relationship with performers?
All music for me comes from the instruments. So if I'm asked to write a string quartet and I'm asked to write a percussion quartet, they're very different musical ideas. So for me, all music comes from an idiom, comes from a sound. Comes from the sound of those instruments that's already there. When I think of writing, say, a string quartet, the music is already there, and they're already playing it, and I just have to find it. Just kind of carve away all the white noise that's around it, and it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just comes from those instruments themselves.
I guess what I meant is, you wrote a piece for the Kronos Quartet, and it's a quartet that has a deep, very deep history of what they do, what they've been able to do.
No, I got you.
So you already have
It's a big
a reference
Yeah.
as to what you can ask
Always.
from them, and
Always.
if you can push them or.
Yeah. And they asked me very specifically what kind of piece they wanted from me. They were they said they wanted a 4-movement piece. They were pretty specific about it. Absolutely. I mean, that piece was written for them with what they do in mind. Orpheus, that commission, the first thing I did was look at who plays in Orpheus. And I know a lot of these people, who they are at least. And there's this guy, Frank Morelli, who happens to be this incredible bassoon player. And I see he's playing principal bassoon. So my piece for Orpheus, Brick, has this huge bassoon solo, only because I knew that Frank Morelli was there. Every piece I write has that. Every single piece I write has a direct connection to the first performance. Premiere performances are extremely important. I don't know why it's some kind of weird voodoo magic, but first performances are very important to the life of a piece. Kronos says this all the time. I don't know why either. So if you write into what those people can do, you have a better chance of it, being successful, and then other groups can take it from there. It has a big influence. I'm a very personal nature, very personal attachment with all the performers that I work with, and because I know them,
Okay. I guess we can open it up to questions from the audience. If anybody has any question. Yep. Nobody.
What's the titles?
I guess, you guys want to ask anything particular to Mark? Huh.
What's with the titles?
There's a lot of food references.
Yeah, there's a lot of food references. That's true.
Because food is music.
I would say something about the titles actually that I like. At least it happens to me. You have a piece that is called Exposed Zipper or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Did I write that?
Yeah,
I did.
yeah, you did. So you have this piece that is called like that, and then you, or at least me, I really wanted to find out why, if there was some sort of musical connection with the zipper of the pants or whatever, I can't find it. I haven't been able to do that. Maybe there isn't any. I don't care. But the title helped me to have a more profound relationship with the music. I really had to sit down and listen. It's just, he's so funny, yeah. No, it's like, this is a weird title. Maybe it relates somehow to the piece. I'm going to try to find that relationship. If I fail to do that, I still listen to the piece carefully, and that's a big plus. So that's my take on your titles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That works.
No more questions? Well, Mark, it's a real pleasure having you here. Oh yeah, we have a question.
Yeah, I have several.
Please.
So one would be, you were talking about the problems of music schools and how they're in denial.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got too into that. It's not as bleak as I painted. I'm just very scared about orchestras and the connection with them.
It's fine. I was just curious about seeing the landscape of musical activity as it is right now in the U.S. or abroad or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you imagine? And of course, this is all going to be hypothetical and speculative, but I was just curious to hear your opinion. How would you imagine music education in, I don't know, 10, 20,
Right.
50 years from now, according to what you've been observing composition-wise or performance-wise, etc. I'm just curious to know, or how do you think they should approach the thing?
That's actually, that's a great question. And I think it is going to change. I think it's changing now. I've talked to other people in other universities, and I see that there's a shift. And it's becoming, music schools are starting to teach more business sense. In my school, we're starting a business degree, a music business degree next year. And you're going to see more and more music business degrees. And I think, and even in conservatories, they have to start teaching students how they're going to earn a living when they get out of school, doing something in music. It may not be exactly what they thought it would be. But music is, all the arts are on a bit of a downswing. And it's okay. I think that's just the way it happens. If you look throughout history, there's these swings in the arts. And it's going to come back up. It's going to come back up soon, but not right now. And I think we're going to have to deal with that where we are, and be practical about it, and write music as composers that makes sense in that type of world. And as a musician, as a graduating degree in cello, you might have to be teaching cello. You might have to do some wedding gigs. You might have to work for a publishing company and part-time freelance orchestra. You may not be playing with the Colombian National Philharmonic. You may be playing, and that's just the way it's going to be for a little while. But we have to give musicians the reality of it, that you can stay in music and it's going to be great. You just might not have the job. Or chamber music, again, like I said, is flourishing, and I think the more focus we put on chamber music, the better off we're all going to be.
I'd like to build on that, or not build on that, but ask, what's the role of audiences? Because the consumption of music is also changing. I mean, throughout the 20th century, music, we take for granted the availability of music. You turn on the radio, you have a CD, you turn on the TV, there's music, and does that change and affect the value of musicians and of live music?
No, you just have to change the way, you have to change marketing. I'm convinced that especially orchestras have to start appealing to a younger audience. These guys are seriously into now. They believe, the audiences are getting older and older and older. I go to a lot of orchestra concerts because I love it, and I see a lot of gray hair, and audiences are getting older. Who's going to replace these people? They're not appealing to a young audience. And if you ask, I've talked to orchestral directors about this. You know what they tell me? They say, everything's going to be fine. When you get to that certain point in your life, you're looking for something different, for enjoyment. Again, I don't believe it. Toronto Symphony, they know where it's at. These guys are getting huge audiences. You know why? Because they're appealing to young audiences. They do Mahler at midnight. And they have a bar set up in the back, and they tell people you can come. People came, outdoor concert,
you could get drunk and listen to Mahler.
Barefoot, jeans, t-shirts, drinking beer, and listening to Mahler, and they went nuts when it was over. It was crazy, And now, you know what these kids do? They're buying tickets for the regular season.
Yep.
Toronto Symphony is doing amazing because they just do a few concerts to appeal to young people. Mahler, they got young people in their 20s to get into Mahler. That's amazing. That's the way you do it. You have to think of something innovative. They're not going to come to you. You got to go to them. I'm all about doing performances in weird spaces, industrial settings. Abandoned warehouses are great for concerts. People think that's really hip and cool. Unfortunately, in Chicago, there's a code, and you have to have enough bathrooms, so they won't let us do it. But you can do it in Detroit. You can do concerts in weird places, and people come, and then they seek it out. It works every time. It's like, man, this orchestra came and they did this. I'm going to go next week and hear them play Schubert. It's like, oh my God, that Schubert was amazing. I didn't even know about it. You have to start appealing to younger audiences, otherwise the audience is going to die, and orchestras are going to become like a museum. Going to be like going to see a Renoir on the paint. You're going to go hear Schubert Symphony, because nobody writes orchestra music anymore. That would be a very sad future.
Well, there's a role in that. Orchestras are also serve the role of preserving and celebrating,
Right.
you know, like just like a colonial art museum does,
Right,
I guess.
right.
You know, just because you just mentioned it, how's the scene in Chicago? How's living as a composer in Chicago? Is there anything you would change, like, or you know?
There's a lot of new music concerts. There's a lot. I mean, Chicago's a huge city. The arts are alive and well. There's a lot of new music going on, and I go to a lot of concerts, and it's great. It's really, really great. It's maybe a little bit of a holdout on a little bit slightly older previous tradition that we've had in the U.S. It's maybe slightly more European based, and that's totally fine. This music is great too. But there's a small movement of more forward thinking in Chicago that, and there's some great venues that have popped up to support this, and that's where I go, and it's great. It's really healthy. It's not like New York.
It's a good
but
place
it's
to
healthy.
be.
Yeah,
It's a good place to be.
yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
If I may. Changing the topic a little bit and going back to the conversation about politics, and how you said that you consider your music as sort of this bubble of art that doesn't relate to these sort of extra musical events or whatever. I have the sense that oftentimes composers in history don't necessarily get involved with politics overtly, but then discourses about music or critics start sort of speculating around that and sort of get them or relate them to politics in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, right now you're alive, but supposing that in a couple 100 years or so, you are like you're a figure that enters into the canon of music commentary or etc. And suppose people would say that right now around this part of history, the position in politics or composer's position in politics was to deny, for instance, these connections with politics and, I don't know, maybe connecting your titles of music with some sort of kind of ideological anti-politics sort of thing. I'm just curious how you feel about that, and if that maybe could be something that's right and that you haven't really thought about. And related to that, if you were to write an opera, what would it be about?
Oh, I've thought about a lot of operas. So, yeah, Yalta. So my opera would be about Yalta.
Okay.
So I met this guy in a bar in Chicago. I'm watching an American football game, and the team is Baltimore, which is where I'm from, and I'm the only guy in the bar who's watching, except for this guy sitting next to me, and I notice he's watching the game too. So I'm like, this guy must be from Baltimore, and I'm very outgoing. I'm not shy about meeting strangers, especially when there's been a few beers. So I keep trying to talk to him, and he was focusing on the game, and finally I got him to talk to me. We're talking about football. We find out we're both from Baltimore. We're both the same age. We grew up a few miles from each other. I'm a composer, and he writes librettos. I'm like, wow. So we decided to write an opera. So we will at some point. He's actually working on the libretto as we speak, and it is on Yalta. It's about Stalin and Roosevelt, and I mean it's all about what happened at Yalta and how Eastern Europe got divided up with in a terrible position. And Yalta, these three figures, these three leaders were there. None of these other countries were invited to participate. They just made the rules for everyone. They did not bring their wives, but they brought their daughters. So we had these female roles, which is really interesting, all three of them. So we had these female roles in the opera too, and their parents adored their kids, even some of the villains, and the connection, like Stalin with his daughter, and what he was doing in reality, and what he was telling. I mean, there was just lots of sort of really cool things that you can write. It's like opera, it's total opera. It's going to be pretty dark, I think. So yeah, that's about opera. I will write an opera. And I keep getting asked this question about how I feel about what my music is going to be, and people look at it in 100 years from now. I don't know. I don't care. I don't want to think about that. I really, like I said, I do my own little thing, just write this little ball and make sure it's nice and shiny and people like it. And if they listen to it in 100 years, great. I don't care. I'll be dead. So, so I don't really think about in terms of that. As far as politics are concerned, again, I'm not. I told you I don't like to think about it, but that's also part of a lie, because I have written music with political overtones in the past, but it's always after. It's always looking back in history. It's never current. Like, I would write a 9/11 piece 20 years from now, maybe. I wrote a piece about the Romanian Revolution, which happened in 1989, and that was the Kronos piece, which was in the 90s. So I'll write a historical, political thing, but I absolutely, certainly will never do it at the current time. It's just not me. It won't be honest, because it won't be honest. You gotta be me.
Any other questions, comments? No? Well, Marc, it's a pleasure. Antonio, Eduardo, thank you so much for sharing
Thank you.
your history, your ideas, and thank you all for coming. And I hope you all come to tomorrow's concert.